From the Historyogi Podcast, this is Dave. Singapore is a city renowned for its reputation as a stern, conservative environment. But history reveals a more colourful past, where queer people carved out spaces for their own voices despite overwhelming discrimination. Today, we speak to Isaac Tng, who has curated a walking tour exploring Singapore's LGBT past and discuss the significance of learning that history. Thanks very much, Isaac, for joining us today. To start off, what prompted you to design this LGBT history tour?
So the backstory to this tour is back when I was actually traveling around Tokyo, Japan, and I got on Airbnb experiences, and I discovered that there were people actually bringing guests around different parts of Tokyo to different LGBTQ bars. Most of it was bar centric, but basically a bar crawler in essence. And that's where it sparked in me the idea that, hey, actually, if people can do this in Japan, then why isn't this something which can be done in Singapore? So I actually embarked on this idea to do the LGBTQ bar crawl. I spoke to a few owners, and it was all supposed to take flight. And then when I got onto Airbnb experiences to register this tour, they told me that I needed to be a licensed guide to do things in Singapore, because in Singapore, nearly everything you do needs to have a license. So good, which is a good thing. I can see the silver linings of that. So what happened was that I had to. Then the pandemic struck, and then it was left with a gap of not much to do, and that's why I decided to do the license. But the license is not cheap, also. But it was actually in doing that process of the license. Ironically, the bureaucracy of it is where I started to realize that, is this actually worth it? Just for a bar crawl. Is there more to LGBTQ spaces and history that has more depth to, merely going from one bar to another to drink? And nothing wrong with going to one bar to another to drink. It's just that I started to think about a deeper education, about the history, about the context, and how these even bars came to be. And so that's the genesis of this, how the tour came about.
Given that awareness is low and resources are difficult to access, how did you gather research material for this tour?
So a lot of it was thankfully we live in a digital age. So there are quite a number of articles, research papers, publications that have been replicated online or just simply published online. So that was a good point of where especially during the pandemic period, where it was hard to actually go forth and go out to just research, and had all this safety distancing and all these kind of things, and it was difficult to access areas like public libraries and all this. It was one of those things where it was available online. I also have to give credit to people, for example, like this individual called Roy Tan, who has been instrumental in actually archiving a lot of LGBTQ resources. And so it's also through this kind of individuals that help the process along in trying to document and trying to curate everything. Actually, I have to say that we do not have a lack of resources. I think it's more of just how to find them, and more importantly, how to curate them, because having too many resources can also bombard any individual, and it's information overload. So it's more of the curatorial process that was exciting, because that's how it had to trim down and what was important and what was not important. But yeah, it was a mix of all sorts: newspaper articles, books, YouTube videos from previous MediaCorp publication, MediaCorp TV show. Yeah. These were some of the examples of ways I could get information.
What surprised you most about Singapore's LGBT history during your research?
People who go on a tour or who are going on a tour, one of the main things that they highlight is, and I phrase this in the accent which they usually ask me, which is, Singapore got history meh? Got LGBTQ history meh? That is really the most frequent question I get. And the thing is, it also surprised me, because here I was thinking, when I first embarked on this journey of looking through material, was how far back can this possibly go? And then that's where it surprised me that it goes all the way to the 1800s. It's something which is really present in Southeast Asia, not just Singapore, since back then, and how different communities actually embrace different identities. And, they didn't marginalize. They were actually people who kind of celebrated different individuals. And this was something which was very unique, because I think most of us who are present today live through an age of oppression or harassment or marginalization, a combination of all this. And we are thinking that this is homosexuality is a thing which just came out, and the differences were something which born into adversity, but actually it was something which reached way back. Another thing which I also surprised me quite a bit was, so one of the things which was interesting was I had different individuals on the tour. Some of them are authors, some of them are more renowned individuals in Singapore society. And then we also have some of them as lawyers who were behind the 377A repeal. And so even from these people, I'm learning things every day. Not just these people, all sorts of individuals who come on the tour.
Now, historically, the queer scene has been concentrated near the Singapore River and Chinatown areas. Why is this so?
Okay, you had to find out on the tour. No. Actually, the Chinatown, Clarke Quay, Boat Quay area is also adjacent to what is famously known as the Raffles Landing site. So this is supposedly where Raffles first landed in Singapore. It's disputed, but according to what is there by STB, is that's where Raffles landed, and also where a lot of commerce first took place, because this is a mouth of the river, Singapore River, right? And back then, this was where trade took place. This is where boats entered. This is where a lot of things were unloaded. Immigrants came in through the waters. So, in a sense, that entire area is actually where a lot of the life started, where a lot of communities started, where a lot of trade, commerce started, which is why you have your Raffles Place there, your Tanjong Pagar. And naturally, I think because it was a place of where it led to modern Singapore society, it's naturally going to be a place also where it's a concentrated queer space, given that your peripheral areas in Singapore, which is maybe your northern part, your eastern part, your western part, were developed for other purposes. You have aside from housing, which designated housing, which means that also you have more families who have moved there. You have places like Jurong, which is, your industrial area, and then the east side, which was your airport, and then you had resorts there back in the day also. And the north part, which was also not as developed at that point of time. So naturally, just by way of geography, human geography, the queer spaces would have emerged there. Of course, there's a lot more detail to that in terms of economics, in terms of historical significance. In a nutshell, this is what I would like to describe it as.
Now, how has Singapore's queer spaces evolved since the late 1990s when visibility slowly began to increase?
So, a lot of queer spaces back in the day, I think, were more transitory in the sense that they were not permanent. They could have been areas that became a queer space, but they were not, purpose-built buildings or actual spaces that queer people inhabited or used. So this was also because of a lack of queer spaces back then, and lack of conversations, diverse communities even within the queer scene. So we didn't really have a space, and most of it just grew out of necessity. So these are your things like your back alleys, or along the beach, along certain places, cruising areas in the park and all this. Over the years, with better awareness, and I would choose to say higher acceptance, we have designated queer spaces. We have spaces that are allocated and are known both by queer communities and straight communities as LGBTQ spaces. Most queer spaces now happen to exist as bars and clubs, which is a positive thing because there is a space for queer individuals to hang out and to feel that they belong, and more importantly, feel safe when they go there, that they don't have to feel that they're going to be harassed or even physically harassed when they go into such spaces or hide who they are. But at the same time, I'm hoping that queer spaces can also evolve into more inclusive social spaces, because not everyone drinks, not everyone is a night owl, and also a lot of the designated queer spaces that are here in today tend to be a bit segregated. So I have actually met many individuals, who tell me that they don't, even though it's a queer space, they don't feel as comfortable being there because they don't feel that they are themselves in the space, and they also feel that the patrons and the patrons/customers are different from who they would usually find solace with or find a community in. So hopefully in future, we have more integrated spaces, more inclusive spaces, and areas where people can choose to find their tribes and feel that they belong. But at least from back in the day, we have come a long way.
So, what is the demographic of your tour participants and how has their feedback been to you so far?
Interestingly, and actually I'm very encouraged by this, have been as young as 12 years old. And well, old in terms of how old they can get to, I don't know, I don't ask, but there are definitely individuals who have been around and are able to relive like certain memories and certain tales which I discuss. So the demographic is quite diverse. I think because there is a older generation. I use the word older to say that they are older, but not particularly that they are very old or anything like this. But they are there, I think, also on two accounts. Number one, it could be to reminisce about memories that they had along certain areas, certain spaces, and think about how things happened in the past in relation to their lives. But number two, which is quite interesting also, I think sometimes they have to also backtrack. Yeah, because they have lived that story. This is actually their tale to tell, right? So I think one of the things is that they come on board and they actually tell the stories, and it's great because there have been times during the tour where there'll be a person who has lived that story and he actually stands in front of everyone, and I encourage him like, please tell us, because I think this is from the horse's mouth. It's the most accurate. So I actually don't mind it when people who have lived that tale tell me about their stories, sometimes even correcting me to say that, hey, actually, this was not the particular spot, it was just slightly off here and all this. Because I think everyone has a different experience and there's no one lived experience. And so a lot of these tales that come from them actually help to form the stories that are told on the tour itself. For the ones who are towards the younger generation, they are mostly there because I think, again, there is a lack of a curated resource when it comes to LGBTQ material. So this is honestly one of the fastest way, a 2.5 hour, what do you call this? There's a word for this. Actually, it's a real question. What's the word for this? When it's like a crash course, yes, it's a 2.5 hour crash course into your quick LGBTQ history leading up to today. So sometimes it's out of interest, sometimes it's because they enjoy walking tours, sometimes it's because I actually have quite a number of people who join the tour because they want to meet other individuals who are like-minded. Remember what I said earlier about drinking holes? So the reason why I commented about that is because I do have quite a lot of participants who say that they don't actually like drinking. And in today's world, it's a little hard to meet it's a little hard to meet LGBTQ individuals because there are certain people who don't like the apps. There are certain people who don't like to go to the bars. And there aren't actually other like social spaces, that many. So they come on the tour to meet because they know that there's someone who's on this tour is also like-minded to them, that they want to know about history. So this is also one of the kind of demographics who I've commonly seen on the tour. The youngest generation are actually students or young kids. So one of the most inspiring moments for me, and actually very, very touching moments, was when I had a mom and a child on the tour, because the child was trying to find their identity and trying to get to know who they are better. And it's one thing to be on this path on your own, but it's another thing to also have your mom on the tour with you in a very encouraging sense, and it was a very precocious child, there was a lot of knowledge which we kind of shared, we talked about. At the same time, the mom took this as a learning experience. I know many demographics, but the last one is actually students. There have been schools who engaged the tour, and it's something which I am pleasantly surprised, and also it's a very positive experience for me. I think during my age, we never had this. We never had a school want to organize activities. In fact, in school, I remember very clearly that, when it came to sexuality talks and talks about gender identity, it was always things like, this is a phase of life, or being homosexual is wrong. And if you were queer, you kind of just, sunk lower in your seat, you hit your head, and you just didn't want to show your face because you didn't want people to know that you were queer.
With Pink Dot over a decade old and 3770 repealed just last year, why is it important that Singaporeans know our LGBT history?
History helps in understanding that queerness in a community has been around for more than a decade, for several decades, and that there are struggling communities and individuals who had to live through different periods of oppression, marginalization. And I think by understanding history is the whole point of knowing how we can be better as a society, because we learn from, well, our mistakes, and we learn from how people were treated in the past. And also we learned about how, well, the queerness in the region was always there. It's not something that was manufactured or brought by the Westerners or the Americans, as people like to allude to commonly. It's something that was in society long ago, And so in history classes in Singapore, when we learn about things like, Hock-Lee bus riots or racial riots in Singapore, if we can learn from these historical events and the mistakes that were made and how we can better ourselves as a society, then why is it that we are not learning about LGBTQ history and seeing how we can also improve our approach in being more inclusive towards LGBTQ individuals?
Could you give us 3 reasons why someone should go for your tour?
The first reason would be to have a more comprehensive understanding of a very invisible community in Singapore. Historically, the queer community has always been around and have been active and contributing members of society. But if you are a person who is unaware of such a community in Singapore, then it's something to be educated. And I don't mean this in a patronizing way. I mean it in a way that it's good to be able to recognize that there are individuals living around you who have been leading very different lives. And these lives may have gone through more adversity compared to some other individuals. It's not a comparison, it is just a historical, is this something which may have happened historically? So it's just good to know how certain communities were in Singapore. That's one reason. If you are not an educational buff, because I've had people who say, I don't really want to go on a tour because I don't really like the learning points of things. It's always a good opportunity to meet other individuals and like-minded individuals who may share the same passion and share the same interest. So one of the delightful things I experienced on the tour is that when we end off the session at a social space and the entire group sits down, a lot of times there are different conversations that go on, and it's not just conversations specific to the tour or to LGBTQ history. It's just individuals getting to know each other and finding a different tribe than someone who you would normally meet, let's say, for example, at a club. So it's a different experience, and it's speed dating without the added pressure of dating, I guess, of, knowing other, yeah. Okay, cut that part out, but it's just me being candid in what I'm saying. A third reason is because as much as a tour guide, I am dispensing information and curating this tour for individuals. Every single tour is also a learning experience for me because I meet people from all walks of life, and not just locals. I meet a lot of tourists, who come from countries where being gay is frowned upon. Being queer is a thing which they get discriminated against. And one good thing about that is that I also learn a lot of these stories. And I think that the only way for conversations to continue happening and communities to keep growing is for people to keep having conversations. This may not be the only platform, and it's not the only platform. You can have a conversation about community and about oneself and identity, but it is at least one of the many platforms where we can keep a conversation going. And as much as people learn from me, I also learn a lot from them. And a lot of times, with permission, of course, I take these stories and I try to build them into something richer and a deeper experience for future guests on the tour, so that there's more knowledge being shared, there's more resources that are talked about, and overall, there's a better understanding amongst different communities and different queer identities.